computer. All right, I believe it's recording now. So this is the Express Technical Committee meeting for March 18th, 2020. We have a few different things, topics that we have on our agenda, plus any non-agenda topics that we're going to talk about. So the first couple things that we have, sorry, I had the discussion open up on this window, is taken from the suggestions, which is I reordered them just because what I felt like would take the shortest first and then the longest last. So I put, there's a question about ongoing roles about the repo captains. Then there was I kind of just injected their general 5.0 talk just to make for sure we don't not get to that. And then there's a suggestion to have a quote unquote working session to land PRs live, and we'll see how that goes and what we can get to there. So I don't know. I think we'll probably take it. We'll probably kick off with the repo captain. So the question came from Glenn, and Glenn was asking about the ongoing roles. So that one's a pretty easy one, at least on the surface, only because from my understanding from the current proposal for a repo captain system is that what you can think of as the ongoing role, at least at the quote unquote volunteer stage, which whether or not that's an official stage is whatever. So what we have for the charter for repo captain is basically I believe it's 6 months. So being involved with the project, and involved is kind of a little generic just because there's many ways to be kind of involved. That once you've reached that threshold, then you can basically propose to become a repo captain of that repo. So if you're in the context of I volunteered, what is the ongoing roles? I would say my high level would be act like an owner, if that makes sense, right? Being that's the high level, right? Because the way the repo captain is kind of set up is basically hey, it's almost set up in a lot of the engineering leveling guides are set up where it's how do I be the next level? It's well, you basically be the next level, and we recognize that, I guess you can kind of say. And that's kind of how it's generically set up. So what that means is that obviously there's different permissions in there, but I know some of you are already triage permissions, right? That gives you the direct ability to label issues, close issues, etc. So I would say generally commenting on new issues, opening issues for, ideas or other things like that. An issue that comes in, maybe it's a bug, opening up a pull request to fix said bug directly, and or helping with someone with a bug. All those are just forms of contributions. We do have in our charter the ability to become a committer. That one's pretty low. It's more it's basically hey, you are basically on the regular making pull requests to the repo. Let's onboard you to give make you a committer on the repo. And so typically, in my mind, you'd basically that would be kind of the natural progression. It's not the required progression. It just naturally you would think probably at some point you'd basically get onboarded as a committer in that repo, and then and once it's kind of at least past that threshold, then it's promoted to a repo owner. Now from the charter, the repo owner, the specific permission it gives over a committer is giving publish access. That's what we're kind of using right now to figure out who should publish what modules, mainly because we don't have a good system right now, and so it just sounded like it made sense, especially if we don't have good automated ways. That's really the eventual future maybe, but right now we just use the manual npm publish and publish it out that way. And then it also kind of sets the expectation for well, day-to-day decisions in that repo, how can we allow them to be kind of like autonomous, as in like, it's not like, oh no, someone thinks that there should be this new feature. Like, do I have to raise it up to all the way to like, the technical committee and et cetera? So that's kind of like the ideal thing. I mean, I think, it's all open for, especially because it's not like it's like as we get more people into it, the role, I'm sure we'll shake out like any specific changes that, we'll make to that or whatever. But that's kind of like the gist of that from my understanding. I'll let Wes go here a little bit because I know Wes kind of pushed it, and just like, I wanted to start it off just because that way I kind of like recite what I think it is. And so that way Wes can point out any flaws in my understanding.
No, I don't see any flaws. I think I agreed with pretty much everything you said there. I guess the only thing would be what are the next steps? Are there any next steps that are different from what we identified last week? And I can't unfortunately go to that without changing my screen. So I was trying to find it on my phone, but even the GitHub app doesn't make it easy.
Gotcha. So by next steps, are you talking about next steps to?
I guess to ratify that into
okay.
charter, because I agree with what you're saying. It didn't sound like you had any concerns, and I think everybody on the call last week didn't either. So
yep. So there is a pull request in the Express repo, and I believe it had I think it even had like a couple of typo suggestions on there that I don't think had actually been.
No, they had not. No, they had not. I've been very busy, and if you're in the background,
you weren't the one who opened the pull request anyways, but
okay.
We can push up to the branch. I haven't gotten to it either. I was kind of hoping that it would just be done. I think it might be actually. All right. Address review comments number 8. So I think it might have actually been done already. I need to look through it. But that was really it. There was the general question. The only other question I put, which was just a question, not even like a required change or whatever, was the 6 months, if they should be as a committer or just as a generic statement. But I'm fine either way. I didn't know if like there was any thoughts on it or not. There is no actual. I don't really mind either way. It was just a question, mainly because I feel like the natural progression is you'd end up being a committer anyways. And the role in general seems to imply that you would at least be a committer anyways. Otherwise, like, you basically have publish rights, but you couldn't even commit to the repo directly, which seems odd. Since you probably need to, at least the way the standard NPM package works is, you'd be like at least pushing up the commit that bumps the version number in the package.json. So that was.
I agree. That seems to be. I agree on both points. It shouldn't be required, but it seems to be the natural progression. I do think maybe though the wording could just be clarified to make it clear that it is fine either way.
Right, because because I would say, like, I can see like someone being a repo owner based on doing that, but a repo owner doesn't necessarily mean they have to publish the module either, if that makes sense, because part of the role of the repo owner is, in helping make the autonomous decisions of that repo. And so, especially if you have, like, say, 2 repo owners, well, I mean, potentially one of them is basically almost like playing, I guess you could say, like, release manager. And the other one is actually the one who is doing the, and then you're both doing the actual, like, day-to-day stuff as well. So, I mean, like I said, that's why I didn't really, even then, like, I could see it just operating even without that even mattering. So that's the only reason. So I think that was it. So I don't want to spend time on here directly double checking the actual changes here because I didn't check them beforehand, but otherwise that was it. And so basically, to also add a clarification, is I think what we clarified was for those who had quote unquote volunteered, is that what we were doing is we're basically landing it with the basically existing ones, and then anybody who had volunteered and is serious about wanting it, we'll just follow up with making a PR to that thing. And therefore we would say like, all right, well, look through the criteria and basically just act like it as normal like that, and kind of like, and then just merge it in. In a way, it's kind of like similar to like, how like the triages were done, right? Like, we had the document, there was no one in there, and then everybody just made PRs to it there rather than like trying to get like a big list. And it helps in that way, which would probably help with this on like, making for sure that we don't miss someone, for example, with like going through and adding permissions and getting that all set up. So that way we can actually have a way to track them as we get each person's like permissions and whatever like in place.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I agree that we should probably have those PRs because yeah, tracking it, even for the triage thing, that helped me a lot as I was adding the initial run of people. So, having it when you've finished, having the, very lightweight process be just commenting and saying, yeah, I've added you on these things. And just having that as a tracking thing, I think will help. Also, as if we distribute the load of that effort, which is one of the reasons, one thing I'd be hoping to do would be the same thing for the triage, because I've been blocking this by inaction for a little while, adding new people. So it'd be nice if like, everybody on the TC could just come in and add a person and knew exactly what to do to do that for any of these roles moving forward. But still in an open way, I think would be good.
Exactly. And so like part of the thing is like, I spent like, my day was pretty much all like meetings, so I wasn't able to get as much prep done for this meeting as I was planning to. But like, I know like this is basically, like I said, was in, I believe, a state that it should be mergeable. And so I wanted to get it actually merged prior to this meeting, just didn't get to double checking on the changes into it prior to it. So, but yeah, otherwise than that, anybody have other questions, concerns, any other conversation around repo captains?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, yeah, it's Glenn. So my question is, and following on from that, when we get, so Jaresh kind of said, yeah, I'll do session. I said, well, okay, if you're doing it, I'll go and look at it. And I'm going through the code now. Yeah, I get it. And a few things, I didn't want to overstep my bounds before I'd actually digested the code. The thing is now we're looking back, we have PRs raised by other people, discussions. My question is, how far back do we go? Do we go back, test them, raise them, say, yeah, I've tried this out, this is good? Should we just do it, suck it and see and say, okay, I've gone back, I'm just going to take one, we're going to look at one, it's got a tick, I'm going to test it, on these 3 different Redis things, I'll try it on, Redis and so forth, and a few others, yes, it worked. I think we should land it. Should we take that approach just as we go?
Yeah,
okay,
like I said, the idea is, think of it this way, right? Like, even though, like, you think of, like, this is how if this makes sense. Like, so you're saying you go up to a project, right? Especially one of these, and we have this repo captain system, and you say, maybe you've never even interacted with this project before, right? We do have a waiting period just to give at least time to like get at least some kind of rapport between everybody at least. So, it's not like, just plopping someone in and then people being all, you never know. We don't want everybody, we want everybody just work together, if that makes sense. And just by default consensus. So it makes it hard sometimes when someone just comes in, people feel like you're stomping all over my ground. So that's, I think, like to me, that's why the 6 months resonated a little bit with me, just to make sure that people aren't like going crazy with each other. And so what I would say is ultimately try to start acting like you're in the repo. Sure, you might not have the ability to hit the merge button, but like say what you think. Raise the questions up, right? Like force the conversation if it's like died off, if that makes sense, right? To be like, hey, I think that this, like basically just put whatever your opinion is, if that makes sense, because that's basically like where it all starts from. I tell people this all the time, like that's how I got involved actually in a lot of open source projects in the first place, is like looking back in a way, you could basically say I came in, I was using it, and then I started like just talking in there, kind of like almost like acting like I was a repo captain, if that makes sense. Being like, someone opens a PR and I'm like, oh, sweet, like this looks good, or here's an issue here or whatever. And, and then, or an issue happens and I'm like, oh yeah, here's kind of like basically just saying like my opinion on it, trying to wear the, the imaginary hat of the owner as if what I was doing. Of course, then the actual real owner might come in and say other things like that. And then like, I may either decide I would defer to them or even ask them more questions about it. This is like, so for example, like back a long time ago, I was doing this when like TJ was here with Express. And that's basically what our kind of dynamic was, if that makes sense. And through that, like, I got an idea from him, like what he thought, like stuff, how it kind of worked. I had my ideas about things, and we just like worked through the issues. He was grateful in a lot of things because like a pull request would come in or even like an old PR, right? And I'd be like, comment on it, or like, it's kind of like when some of the triaging started where it's like, hey, should this be closed? Or I think this should be closed because of X, Y, Z. Sometimes to be quite honest, some of these repos, some of the PRs, especially really old PRs that are open, there's a couple reasons why that is, but I'm going to say a couple reasons and not say which ones are which, because I think that your opinion matters, if that makes sense. So I don't want to bias it, but so there are some that are open there because like, this is my personal opinion. So that would just be for ones that I'm like either by de facto repo captain, if that makes sense, or just similar things, basically that I'm kind of like managing it. Is some PRs are just kind of open because I don't really want to land them, but it's kind of like, I'm sure you guys have seen sometimes, man, it can be kind of, it's like a whole thing, right? When I've sometimes I'm really strong opinion on it, so we'll definitely go through the whole song and dance. People who are subscribed to repos might have seen that recently on I forget which repo it was. I think it might have been like the serve static repo, but it always, a lot of these things when you turn down people's PRs, even if they really are for legitimate reasons, like, makes sense, right? People open a PR. I tell people at my work, like, about like the problems, right? When someone opens a PR, they don't open it just because a lot of times they're invested in it landing, right? And then I think they get caught off guard when there was no prior conversation. And then like essentially the repo owner, whoever that is, obviously me in this case, an example, but still it could be anybody, right? Says, no, I don't think that belongs here or something like that. I mean, I've encountered that plenty of times when I've opened PRs at other projects and things like that. And sometimes people will want to argue about it, which, can be sometimes mentally draining. But so basically, like, that's one of the classes of some of those PRs that are open. Is just almost like I just don't want to deal with it, and wish it would just close by itself. Other ones, they are kind of legit. They either need some kind of like fix-ups or other things like that just haven't got around to. And it's the classic like problem of like, oh, the person who opened the PR did like 80%, right? And then we need to get that 20 more percent. And it's like, when is it, just needs that push over the bar kind of thing.
Actually, can I add on to that? I think that specifically is one of the things where I think the repo captain should be the point person on taking those forward.
Right.
And the reason why I think folks hesitate today is because there's no official role for that, and there's no official end for those things to be done and released, because they still need today a bunch of steps, which include reaching out to you to get the publish done for most of these modules. So I think a repo captain who has the ability to take it from that 80% actually to 100%, not just to 98, with the last 2% being your approval and a publish step, would actually incentivize them to go and do the full, remaining 20%. So I think that's where I think the repo captain role, and even if, like you were saying, you fake it till you make it kind of thing, right? Like, to Glenn's concern is, maybe I'm not ready to do it. Still, you can get it to that 98%, knowing that all it takes now is to say, hey, Doug, I'm good here. Can you and I work on publishing this tomorrow or something?
Yep.
Is a lot better case than where we're at today, which is people just don't even pick the PRs up. They just sit there because nobody, if somebody's like, well, I guess I could, but what happens if I just leave it at 95%? Then does somebody else just have to pick it up? Like it adds a lot more questions when you don't have the agency to fully complete it on your own.
Yeah,
I know I do this, so.
Right. And that actually encompasses, like, in my mind, like the question of how do I get to repo captain is, yeah, like you said, like fake it like you make it, right? Kind of like start acting like you are, right? Because I think that, to be honest, like I kind of hesitate a little bit, though it's in a charter. So, I mean, I'm not going to argue with stuff in the charter still, but like, ideally I would feel better handing like the repo over if I've like, kind of like have at least some idea where they're taking it, and that, the publishing, they got a handle on, whatever it is, right? It's not hard. It just, it makes makes the people feel better, I guess you could say. I think that's kind of like where the 6 months come. I didn't put the 6 months there, but that's why it resonates a little bit with me.
I did, and I think I did it partly to make sure you felt very comfortable with that. Seeing as I wrote up the proposal, I was proposing adding myself on a couple of things.
Right, and
so
because personally, I mean, I don't know. Some people might call it like, I don't know, picky or something like that. I would call it more like I'm very detail oriented, if that makes sense. So it to be at work is already sometimes irritating enough. It was funny because just recently people were like, this project that got handed over to other people, they stopped putting release notes in the internal GitHub. And then all of a sudden, like external people, because they probably just didn't feel like doing it. And then external people started poking fun of it, and they got really upset because people were like pointing out their mistakes. But like, it's like, well, I mean, it was actually documented what to do and how to make that release note stuff. And apparently people liked it, it just, I guess to them, it felt like extra work, so they didn't do it, and they got them upset. But I thought it was funny and amusing in a way. But like, yeah, like, I don't know. And I'm not even saying that I do everything right, if that makes sense. So please don't feel like that's the case. Everybody for improvement in all kinds of ways. So I just want to make that clear too. Do not, just because like I'm doing a bunch of this stuff doesn't mean you can't question things and have different opinions. And I like having different opinions and actually having like productive conversations. I mean, I think that's in a way kind of like what a repo owner is in my mind, right? Someone who like has a vision for that module, if that makes sense. And versus like, say, I'm just going to land whatever PRs open up on me without any good vision of what this module is and is not, right? Because anything can easily just become a soup of features, which, as you see Express, where it's like split out in tons of modules, kind of like tries to live against that grain, if that makes sense. I know, even Wes, like, you're trying to, you have the proposal for like making a different, separate modules for the request and response prototypes. And that's along that same vein, right? Because we could just keep it in Express repo and just continue to pile things in there. It's technically probably fine, but
it's
the
been fine
vision,
so far, but the vision, yeah.
right? Like, I think Wes was here like a long time ago when I said like one of my top visions for like Express, that this is when the whole like stuff was going on. You were here, Wes, for sure, when I was like, yeah, I can envision Express the module basically being a single file that just glues a bunch of pillar stuff together, right? And that's kind of like along the vision, right? It's like, yeah, like, and that's my vision, obviously, and that's not saying like you can't, and like the whole point of it is not to just say, I can't challenge it, right? And that's like, obviously, like, part of that is like through anything, right? There's consensus seeking, there's talking about the TC, and part of this is all just for when people have such differing opinions and they're really strong about it, and then they don't come to an agreement. There's things for it, but I think I think there was a chat on that the other day where it's like the idea, right, is to just naturally come to an agreement. Both sides, right? All sides need to come to agreement. Either one side needs to explain themselves better, whatever the pros and cons are, because I think that can be hard to articulate pros and cons. But anyway, I'm going to stop myself before I go too far deep from the original question, which is how do I become repo captain?
Speaking of that, which is good, but we do have a bunch of other things that were on the agenda.
Correct.
I like this one because I obviously think it's important, and I think it will move the rest of them along. But maybe we should go on to the next item. Or is there a way to wrap this particular one up? Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good. I was just going to say, to synthesize what we were just talking about, what I got out of that is to get started being a repo captain. To behave like a repo captain is to be opinionated, be active in the repo. To Glenn's question a little bit about PRs, repo captains are beholden to the repo and making it better, not specifically to any PRs that are already open. And part of being a repo captain is being opinionated about the purpose of that repo or that project. And if it's an old PR that makes it better that you can help out with, do it. But otherwise, get involved, get active, get opinionated about it, and prioritize people that will help you make the PRs good. But otherwise, the buck stops at the repo captain to improve that module.
Yep. And that's exactly what I think that we should be doing for repo captains. I mean, think about Linus, right? I mean, he's sitting here, he makes changes to, for example, Multer he's not like begging the TC to go like approve and deny things. And so, yeah, I mean, that's, like I said, obviously we'll, I'm sure at first we'll be learning from each other, but I mean, I'm basically saying like, that's welcome, right? So just don't be afraid to like put what your opinion are if you go to a repo and find stuff, because, force the conversation, be like, hey, look, I don't think that this PR, you might say like, I don't think that this PR should make sense to go here. And then like, like myself might chime in or someone else could chime in, right? And we want it to be kind of like, yeah. And like, or like say, I really think this makes a lot of sense. This should definitely be here. And then, if I say, and it's up to me, for example, if I see that and I say, and I don't agree, just like what would be on any of us, it's like, I can't like, just like I would expect from anybody else. It's not like, I don't agree. It's like, no, like here's my reasoning, right? Like, so that way, without reasoning, right, you can never actually argue, you can never actually debate it. And so in a lot of ways that, of course, if two people agree, then they don't really have to give reasoning to each other because they already agree. There's no real point. So, but definitely if there's disagreements anywhere, like, the idea is to, try to like, not only like to help other people understand, but of course to also be like, try to like think, the other person to think like, what are they thinking? And whatnot. I don't know. But yeah, so yep, to get started as a repo captain is effectively like just try to start acting like one, and then like, having opinions on the things, saying what you think about whatever, that includes, if you, it doesn't have to, it can even be new issues, like saying like, hey, here's something I think that it should have, bam, new issue, it should be like this. And part of the thing is, right, when it may be weird because like, so when you only have a single repo captain, right, which is kind of like how a lot of them have been operating, where like I've been the de facto singular repo captain, sometimes that you won't find a lot of those kind of issues because of course it'd just be talking to myself in some ways. So when a repo has multiple people, it makes a lot of sense to do stuff like that. More sense than anything else. So of course, like, don't feel like just because like there's an issue can always be closed or anything like that. And so don't feel like there's a opening an issue is like a whole thing, because they're very thin, open, close at will, have whatever discussions. And of course, it being public also gives the opportunity for anybody else to chime in, though it's very unlikely the actual users really watch the repo. They would just only happenstance be passing by. So it really isn't a good forum for our users to have share their opinions, unfortunately. But at least, the people who are involved can share their opinions. So, yeah.
Cool. So just to wrap up with hopefully a point. I committed last week to making some edits to the. I think that's where I left it. Right? I was going to make a couple of edits, and then we were going to merge that. So I will actually do that tonight. I apologize. Last week I was in Florida. I had traveling and the virus and all that stuff. So.
Yeah, the whole world has been going crazy it's really it is kind of a wrench, and it, especially because a lot of us, I'm sure just like you, like it's, this is not the primary task. So of course it ends up where it does fall a little bit behind, especially when there's a lot of coordination going on.
Distractions.
Right, exactly.
So,
Hi,
but I will
this is
tonight.
5:30 a.m. today, so I don't know whether I'm articulating you properly or not, but just want to add one statement here. For me, part of the problem which this is going to solve is, uh, lack of velocity in the project, if I put it that way, right? If you look at the core repo Express.js/Express, the last PR which landed was last year, and there are 78 PRs which are pending for reviews and etc. So we know that the actual committers in the project org is pretty less. We have good number of TC members if you look at 10 or so, but then the people who joined today is probably 2 or 3, etc. So that's actually a true reflection of where do we stand. And the most imminent thing is Express 5, and then looking forward for Express 6, HTTP 2, 3, etc. The innovative features that's coming, that's being demanded, needs to be flown into the project at the right pace, which we deem fit. So part of it is to decentralize the effort and having a better, uh, you know, responsible repo captains who can take part of the weight and at times discuss with TC, at times discuss with the peer repo captains and make the whole system working well to meet the velocity challenge. That's the main intent from my perspective. So for me, the 6 months committer or the couple of clauses which Doug uh, you were pointing out is probably too detail oriented at this point of time, given the problem. So probably if that happens to be a challenge in terms of people abusing it and things like that, we definitely should be more strict with the words and things like that. But at this point, it's not the problem with the plenty, or it's not the problem with the abusal. It's a problem with the lack of people, to be putting it in plain terms.
So, Dresh, could we make a small change to the wording there and say, typically we like to see 6 months, but with approval of the full TC, that can be waived, which I think would maybe help with the short term, help getting this group who are, trusted, and we will make sure we are doing the right things to onboard everybody well. We could say the volunteers we took last week, we just do it even if they're not quite meeting, or whatever the terms in there. Would that help address your concern?
Makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll make that small change, and then anybody who dissents at this time with that can just bring it up in the issue, and then I'll make that change tonight along with the other changes we discussed. And then if nobody's dissenting by, say, tomorrow, we'll merge it. Does that sound reasonable to folks? Yeah. Okay, cool. So now that just so that we don't spend our entire time, because we've already spent almost 40 of our hour, 40 minutes of our hour, we should move on to the next point.
Yep, because ideally these meetings, we try to at least keep them at an hour, so that way at least it's predictable, and we don't just go on forever. So so the next thing that I definitely wanted to at least make sure that we had time for was any topics around, especially Express 5, since that's our top priority to get out. Like, and the reason why we started with repo business first, because it is related, for sure. So I wanted to make for sure that we had at least got those open questions out along the way, then other stuff. So, I mean, I'll start a little bit where we do have now one of our probably most major changes that's a breaking change. That's going to be one of the more major breaking changes, which is the path to regex changes. That's in router. I've spent quite a bit of time really playing around with what all the detailed changes are exactly in these routings. We do have the initial PR to add the docs to the website. So we're gonna, we'll probably get that landed here. They look generally fine. If I think of anything else, I can always follow up with another PR anyways. And so,
are you talking about PR number 3621?
Of the website
No.
you talking about?
No. So I think we started with the path to regex. So this is the Express.com 1114.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Yep. Sorry, I had to look it up. But yeah, so that's the biggest breaking change that we have. And so effectively, if it weren't for all the hoopla going around recently, that is my number one priority, is getting that into an Express release, like Express 5 release, like ASAP. That's basically what is on the top of my mind, and basically what I'm pretty much going to be doing all night tonight after this meeting, because it's just, it's night where I am in Eastern time. We'll probably be leaving off at 8:30, so that's like 5+ hours I've like been able to get aside to do nothing else but get all that stuff up in there and get that all kicked off, including all the merging of a lot of these like random PRs and Express, and get all of that kind of like wrapped up so we can has been stated, like get our velocity up there. That is probably going to be the biggest change we make. There's a few other PRs that had fixed a few other things, which we'll get in there too. But I don't think that there are any truly breaking changes outstanding after that. And I don't say not breaking at all. I'm just like truly breaking where like it's going to be an actual, like a lot of people are going to have to change a lot of stuff in their app. Is that right, Wes? You can't think of any other major
I agree.
changes,
And
right?
the only one that I was going to consider breaking was the moving the response and request out. But I think John's point, if we just re-import it at the path, I actually think we can make that as a non-breaking change.
Yeah, but even then I was and that's why I was trying to at least quantify it with a truly breaking, because even if that's technically breaking and we still have that in the queue, I think that that's okay. But at least like this will get up our effectively almost our final version at this point. So that way means we're definitely on the last stretch, because I, just like a lot of people, I want to get this, out there and released as soon as we can, and so we can stop dragging this thing around, you know what I mean? Even when we were talking at the end of last year, like that's what we said, but then we didn't really we never really pushed ourselves to do it. And I think that since I think Wes, since you went around and went through and got like the triagers and this, I mean, in a way it's providing a lot more motivation and like purpose, if that makes sense.
I have to say, this is to, Jaresh on the triagers, because that's definitely, he's been point on that. But the turning point here was going to the package maintenance working group and saying, hey, there's only a few people really actively working here. We need people who are invested in moving the project forward. And so that was the turning point. And that really literally having a community around this stuff is going to be the most important thing, over the next, years, to keep pushing it forward. So I'm happy to be a community lead, you know, and even if which I have been doing lately, and it's not intentional, but not committing a lot of code, I'm happy to continue pushing on the community stuff as much as possible. So
Yeah, well, even that I think is just temporary, right? It's kind of like we got this, like,
Mhm.
we got to ramp up this, you know, which is part of getting velocity, right? Because part of what has sucked velocity, and that's what I know you went and did like the package maintenance for, and that's what we're kind of like designing this repo captain for, is because there are a bunch of things, right? And they do suck the velocity away and spread it out over lots of different things. And so, you know, getting that, in a way, getting the velocity back is more, isn't 100% that we were lacking velocity, that we kind of were. It was more like it was spread very thin, so the things would move
absolutely.
flow, because even if you had X amount of time to put into it, you got to spread it out over more stuff. And so getting more people means that they can all spread it over smaller things. And therefore, yeah, you can almost think about it as like a team just has too much, they have too many projects on that team and not enough people. It just wasn't well planned, which actually is literally the work team I'm on right now's story, coincidentally or not. We're trying to make it better, but yes, it is. I don't know. But yes, so and that's kind of like where it goes from. In fact, like I think several people on the triagers even suggested, you know, watching all the repos. So I mean, I'm sure they probably have seen even me like not, you know, comment in various repos. And so as you see, I'm still, you know, I spend lots of time like commenting and like trying to like shoehorn things around. And so, but of course, you know, there's only so much to really.
Well, today what we need is pushing code, I think, not necessarily commenting. So I'm excited. So I have a question on the path to regex update. So I laid out a PR that merged a bunch of little things with some dependency updates, and then because I was busy with stuff, did end up leaving it. Do you have any next? Is there anything I could do on that to move it forward, or have you taken that and sort of integrated those?
Nope, those are all landed now.
Okay,
So
cool. I kind of thought so, but I hadn't fully followed up. So
yep, nope, every single one of those that you bumped some build dependencies, some other things. Yep, I got that all taken care of for you. That's where I got the path to regex finalized up there, and so I plan to tonight like get that published and like, you know, continue to get all that stuff merged up into Express with all this other stuff. And so we got all that pushed forward. There were some tweaks I ended up making to the code itself. It was more like just stuff that I found when I'm just trying to like think about why these changes were occurring at the regex, which helped me like better understand like what, you know, Blake had changed in there. And it's not his fault, you know, it's part of our fault of just like letting it fall so far behind. So that will, you know, as we've talked about before, you know, long term, like especially after we get over this, I'm sure we will be part of our focus, you know, that we're spending a lot of focus time on 5 will be kind of towards that, right? How do we, where do we go from here? What is our velocity? I know there's been proposals about like major version cadence and stuff like that, all good stuff that we will definitely be talking about for sure, because we don't want to fall behind on things, you know, due to just velocity, which then just tears your velocity down that much more.
that is what I felt with that. Yeah. Can I move us on to a different one? Is that
Sure.
all right? Just
Yep.
again to continue moving forward and time boxing a little bit. I've been getting good at this with all these video calls I've been doing. It's very easy to spend too much time on a topic. So if we go down this list that Josh posted, so we've got the change default query parser from extended. I feel like somebody also picked that one up. Am I correct on that?
Correct. Okay. And in fact, the only other thing I would add to that I realized that just to make it consistent, which I'm going to get in there anyways, was that, so the body parser, which was like as express.unit URL encoded, also has its thing set to extended by default. It is deprecated by using the default, which is basically what we're doing to Express. And so we'll make I'm going to take that. I'm taking that up as a task item for here, just so as we land that, we'll make sure that what actually appears in Express 5 is uniform there as well, where they'll both be this simple parser, if that makes sense.
Yeah, great. So it looks like, Jaresh, you picked this up. And is there anything remaining on this PR to finish?
I don't think so. That just has to be landed, basically.
So there is 3621 and there is 4208. The original proposal was to take it up both the code and the deprecation changes. But as it is, when I looked at 3621, it is complete in all the aspect from the default query parser change perspective. The only thing that is uh, going to complement that is to deprecate in the 4.x lines, which is the one which I picked up in 4208. So I guess these two are full in themselves, but when it lands, it should land together. Is that right, Doug?
Yep. So that is basically part of the merge that's going on, is that we will be landing a whole bunch of stuff on, the master for Express, which will be one of those, and that will merge up into 5 and then have the actual swap over as part of it. But yes, so basically what he's saying, Wes, is like the 2 PRs, the first one, which is that old one, is complete since it's pretty simple. You just change the default. And so he had picked up just getting over the line, deprecating it in the 4.x line, which gives people the heads up basically that the behavior is going to silently change on them when they change it to 5 without any like errors and stuff like that, which from in the past that just causes endless confusion and questions. I mean, we're still going to get them, of course, because people are going to follow tutorials and whatnot, but at least people can get some kind of pre-warning. It, of course,
Yeah,
it's kind of like, it reminds me of the whole request deprecation thing where it's like, just some kind of heads up will help people. So that's all that's about.
So we'll do a point release. Well, I guess it'd be a patch release for that one.
Yep.
On 4, and then we have the merge for the 5 change. So those seem resolved then.
So one of the questions I have there is about the timelines, right? How much leeway do you think is reasonable between the patch release, which describes the deprecation, and then the 5.0 release, which actually moves it away? So what is a consumption or gestation period which you typically allow to the people? I don't know. I'm just asking.
Yep. We don't have any policy on it today. The part of it is in my mind because I'm not sure if, like, once it is, we already know we want to do it, so I'm not sure if we really need a gestation period. But I think it's all open for discussion. So the way it's been working, which is how we did like things from 3 to 4, for example, and how we've been doing 4 to 5 is more like, well, we're already going to like remove it in 5, so we'll adding the deprecation in 4 is mainly to be nice, to give a heads up. So the idea in my mind is, hey, you want to upgrade to 5. Well, upgrade to the latest 4, which should not break you in any way. Resolve all the deprecation stuff that you see, and then it should be pretty straightforward on then how to go jump to 5. Basically, the deprecation message almost, at least in my mind, is like the programmatic upgrade helpers, if that makes sense, besides just having to read through documentation and realize you're using something, which in my experience with working with people is that it's very hit and miss, because I've tried to do it with Node, and man, it is quite hard to figure out what exactly all got changed between in a new major version by hand. So that's kind of like, that's the idea. Not that it has to stay that way, but
I'm perfectly, I think that's a good path, and I think just landing them both and dealing with any consequences, which again should be really minor, with just the instructions of upgrade to the latest 4, and we should be good. Are we good on those ones? Can we move on? I want to keep us moving so that we can at least tackle this list before the end of the time. Okay.
Yep.
So then we're moving on to, So throw out invalid status codes. John, your PR looks like it's pretty much done.
That would be my assessment from my recollection too, because I was planning on getting that merged in tonight as well. And that one, once again, pretty straightforward. We already knew what we basically wanted. There was some tweaks on there, and I think, as far as I remember, I was just looking at the other day because I have it on my list here for stuff to merge in tonight, is that it was all good to go. It was pretty sad that we weren't able to merge the simple part of it into 4, because people be crazy, I guess you could say. I don't blame them. I do the same thing, right? You reverse engineer how stuff works and you just go with the flow. But we'll be able to truly help people out, because that was the whole point of this one, is that people were just, it was very confusing when the error message was thrown way later in the process by Node. So this will be a nice one. I like this one to get in there too. So yep, as far as I know, that one's good. I'll get in that merged in tonight.
Okay, and we already talked about the last one, which was just the docs, which also look pretty close, just a couple maybe edits as we do that last. So the one that didn't make it on this list but was still a little bit contentious was my one pulling out the rec res. Was there anything to talk about on that?
So the only thing I think to talk about is more like, I guess, what does it actually look like, if that makes sense? I think that in my mind, that's really where the question is. It's not that we don't want to do it, if that makes sense. Part of the question was, how is it breaking or not? That's already been discussed. So I think at this point, it's more like just, what does it look like? And then what, especially like, and then part of that was, I guess you could almost say, like, the question is if it came down to it, to hold off 5.0 or not to hold off, like, is that one a must 5.0, or is it a, if stars align? I guess that was the only other question that I had in my mind from that conversation.
Yeah, so I laid out, I think, so I was thinking of it as a breaking change. So that was why I really, really, really was pushing for 5. If we treat it like a non-breaking change by just re-importing it, then I could land it on 4. And I could do that very quickly, because as I went and dug back in, it was, a year or more ago that I originally started the work. I'm very close. I have a rec and a res already pulled out. The only things I outlined in which issue, the discussions issue, just Express 5.0.0. I don't know which number it is because it doesn't show in the GitHub mobile app. But basically, the only remaining thing is make sure all the tests pass, move it into Pillar.js, which I assume is, we all agree, the right location.
Yeah, and you can just
publish
repos, just to clear that up. You should have the power to make a new repo. Yeah, and we can, if there's really contentious about the name, we can always discuss it after the repo is made. Basically, I wouldn't, like, especially like since you're on the TC, I would say act as asking for forgiveness versus asking for permission.
So funny thing, I made these, I think, before I had the ability to make repos. So these repos have just been sitting on my thing because that's where I did the work back 2 years ago or whenever I started it. So if we're good with that, I will make those. I will submit a PR that puts them into an empty branch. Do I even need to do that? I'll just push them as they are, and we'll just continue to collaborate there. Yep. As long as we're in agreement. I just didn't want to do it if we didn't think Pillar was the right place. But again, you're right. We can just move them. It's not a big deal. Right. So I'll push those tonight. And then if we want to divvy up the work, sorry, I'm talking fast just because there's technically only 2 minutes left. So if we have to divvy up, like if John, you mentioned that you'd be happy to help. If anybody else is willing to do the last couple of things on that checklist, I don't see any reason why it would hold up the release, because again, the work is mostly done. All it is doing is copying and pasting stuff out of the Express repo into another place. There's actually no code changes.
I have a quick question. About the RecRes. What happens to the tests for RecRes under Express now? I see they got moved to Rec and Res. Are they going to be duplicated in both places, or are we going to remove some of those tests from Express itself?
My intent was to delete them, but I would love to hear other people's opinion.
I would just chime in and say, I would love to move them, aka delete them from Express. my only hesitation is because of this, the way the whole, you probably remember, Wes, the whole canary in the gold mine, I would say, to issue, the whole thing that came up there, and they were like only testing Express. So I had actually, if you noticed in Express currently, there's actually a bunch of this, I copied a whole bunch of the serve static stuff and the body parser stuff in there, just so we would like force the issue with Sitgem. I think like we need, like, really, I think the best answer is I don't want these stupid things duplicated, because that's just annoying. It's a lot more maintenance work. It's really easy to, like, you know, when you add the stuff and change things in this upper repo, like maybe fix bugs, so you had a test for it, like it's inevitable that it'll be forgotten to copy over. So it's just stupid. So yeah, my opinion is they should definitely be moved. The only reason why you might see some copied is because of that issue, which I think that we probably just need to we really just need to push harder on making them test that stuff in the
I think they'd be open to it. I've talked a bit with Beth about this, who is the primary person running most of that, and I think she's fully on board with us.
Yeah.
Testing more there.
Another side thought that I've thought of and never really did anything with it, but so just to throw it out there, is I've thought about potentially having like a way for them to just run like almost like a meta repo of ours. So it's not really technically a project. It's more like a, hey, I'm going to pull down Express and run its tests, and then, kind of like go through and run our own. Basically, it's almost like they can point to one place, and then as we split things out or not split things out, we can like update that. And they run one thing, because remember, they run from GitHub. They don't run from NPM. So they can continue to run their one thing, but then it kind of allows us to then say, oh yeah, and clone this repo and run those tests, and clone this repo and run those tests. And maybe that's an answer too. I don't know. I had thought about that, never did anything about it, but
This might be a good, you know what, I'll actually create, so out of this, I'll create at least a few things here. So tonight I will make the repos in Pillar. I'll push the code. I will, at that time, submit a PR to SitGym to test both of them. And then I will open an issue on the Web Server Frameworks Working Group to discuss how better to integrate testing with the Node core stuff, which is exactly what that group is for. And we have the meeting for that tomorrow, so I'll add the agenda label, and we can just make sure that people are aligned on that tomorrow. Does that sound like that covers sort of all of the topics here?
Yep. And
cool.
I want to add one more thing in case people aren't familiar with the canary in the gold mine thing. It's basically a way for Node to find out, like, when they're making, especially like breaking, or if they don't, or they're not sure of breaking changes, they find out what the ecosystem impact is. And Express is a very large portion of that ecosystem. And so just like we don't necessarily want them to unintentionally break it, they don't either. And that's the key word, is unintentionally. They don't necessarily mean they won't break us, but the idea is that they just don't want to make unintentional things they didn't realize would break and then would have made them reconsider. So that's the only reason why, that's where this whole canary in the gold mine or SitGym comes into play. So kind of gives us some context.
Awesome. So I think that actually covered all of our 5 issues, doesn't it? Does anybody have any others that we were missing? Don't see any.
Cool. Oh, one more issue. I'm going to open up a specific issue for this just as a follow-up, so we don't have to talk about it now. But just to make for sure we discuss, like, I know there's been like various things going back and forth on this meeting's cadence, as in day of the week / time. And so I'm going to open up an issue so we can just figure it out once and for all. Like right now, I just had put it back to here just because I know I can be here at this time to run the meeting, and that, and that was all. Because I wasn't sure if like Wes was gonna, especially with all the stuff going on. I actually I was like trying to hurry up and get everything all done today just to even be here because of that stuff, which was a surprise. But this way we can like make for sure that we have it there. And of course, remember everybody that the meeting is definitely recording. We recorded on purpose. The idea is that, even if you aren't here, that your opinion does matter, and that you can listen to the meeting, raise any issues you found from the conversation that happened, and that we will be able to talk about it, asynchronously or even at the next meeting. So the idea is that even if it's at a meeting time where like certain people can't necessarily attend in person, the intention is that everybody is allowed, at least in my mind, to participate in the meeting, even if they couldn't literally be there. So that's why we record it, put it up there, just to keep ourselves honest, with everybody else on what we talk about, and to give the opportunity to understand what was spoken about in the meeting, that of course you can't just read because it's written words. Maybe one day, in my mind, in the far future, maybe, like we'll get some, meeting minutes being taken during the meeting, but,
Glenn, didn't you open a thing on the package maintenance working group that had some sort of like auto transcriber? Wasn't that you?
Yes. So I did that. There's a tool I have so I can grab down the video and put it down. It didn't seem to be a whole bunch of interest in it. It's about 95% accurate. Like when people do talk with an accent, you'll understand what it says, but you will laugh. You just have to understand it phonetically. I'm quite happy to do that for all of these meetings. It's no bother at all.
Yeah, I think it's valuable. So like one of the things about this discussion repo is that one of the things that we're also felt like ideal is like we'd have the meeting, which was the issue, and then it's almost like we'd follow up with a PR that would have the meeting minutes. I mean, it's not too dissimilar to how like some of the Node stuff is. So like we could have a PR. It's like a document that has the link to the specific YouTube video, and then like, for example, we can easily like paste in like the transcription. Say it was transcribed from a computer, so it's not perfect, but then plop. And who knows, maybe the community might start coming there and like making PRs to correct it. That'd be pretty cool.
I'm quite. The advantage of it is you can search by word. You just
Right.
got to remember the topic, and you can find the topic.
Yep.
And it's a lot easier.
So my thing on this is that the reason this works on Node is because there are folks who are good note takers.
Correct.
I am not a good note taker, and that's why I haven't volunteered, because it would be useless notes, and I recognize that about myself.
Yep.
If anybody is a good note taker and wants to volunteer, I think that's sort of the easiest way to have a good reproduction in text form. But again,
if I can download it, I'm quite happy to do that and raise a PR, put it somewhere with here is the text. I'm quite happy to do that.
Yep. Because that's the same reason, Wes. And part of this being like a volunteer system is a lot of this is kind of like, we would love to have this, certainly not, we're not going to force anybody to do it who doesn't necessarily want to, but, we talk a lot of times about like, how can you contribute? There are so many ways to contribute that aren't just code, and that, it's a really, good way to just put yourself out there and like, contribute and like, be able to like put it on your CV or whatever. I'd back someone up like that if they say, "Oh, can you say how I've been helping?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, absolutely," if you need that. So cool. Well, all right. That to make sure that we keep it to not go forever, I guess we'll wrap up here. Any last thoughts before we kind of like just wrap off here? Anybody have?
I have one quick thing to say. I'm about ready to release version 2.0 of Mutter. So if anyone wants to, I'll post a link in the discussion for this meeting. But if anyone wants to check it out, maybe read the PR or have any comments on it, they are very welcome to put them in that PR. But other than that, if there's nothing major coming up, I will probably try and release it in the nearest days, probably.
Sweet. Awesome. I'll probably at least poke at it a little bit. I've been subscribed to that PR for like forever, and so did notice that you were pushing up a few commits to it recently. So
awesome.
Awesome. All right. Let me end the recording here.